Welcome back to Deep Thoughts. As you can tell, as I always say, today we're going to talk about education. And this is going to be a generic observation of education as I see it today, how we've let it erode over time, and the minimum things we need to do to fix it, and then maybe some maximum things we can do to fix it. I'm going to talk about very specific things I saw with my kid going through school. I'm going to talk about some things that I've experienced going through school. And then I'm just going to talk about some generic things that just need to happen for every human being on planet Earth. If you think about it, it's interesting when we're stuck in society, we think, as society says, we have this sort of hive mind thing that happens to us, right? But we don't think about it in a complete vision. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? All right, let's give ourselves a scenario to understand education just a little bit better, right? You and I find ourselves on a deserted island. Deserted island. It's got everything that we need to live. There's no predator on that island that's going to hurt us. And we arrive with a few kids, maybe it's some shipwreck. And then we're going to have more kids. And we know that for whatever reason, the state of the world is that we're going to be stuck on this island and there will not be a rescue. Perhaps we're going there on purpose. And now you have children that you're staring into their eyes and you're realizing, let's say they're all tiny, but they can kind of talk to you. So you're kind of like little 3 to 5 year olds, and you're realizing that they need education. In order to continue surviving on this deserted island, they're going to have to get some education. You want them to know things. You don't want them to go back to caveman times in 3 or 4 generations. So you're going to give them a lot more information than maybe is even necessary on this particular island, just in case they go back to the mainland at some point. They won't be Tarzan. How would you do it? How would you do it, and what would you do? And I think that's where we should all start off our frame of mind. It's not thinking about the corrupt system that's there and then trying to fix a corrupt system. Let's just go at it from scratch first, and let's get on the same page of what would be necessary. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. They always says the 3 R's, but arithmetic doesn't start with an R. But those are the 3 basic things that you need just to function in life, right? Being able to communicate properly. It's essentially reading what someone else wrote, learning how to write it yourself, and doing a little bit of math to make sure you can control your future. Plan properly. Just learning a language in general. Phonetic linear thinking. Remember when man used to write in symbols in iconic languages, we simply had a picture of a dog meant a dog. But that means everyone had to be an artist just to communicate with each other. And then you had to kind of agree on what symbol of dog, what type of dog we're going to write down. And that manifested a here and now thinking pattern, which made them very vulnerable to those who ended up creating phonetic languages and thinking linearly. And I have to say, man thinking in a linear way and spelling out a word in syllables, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing how that transformation occurred, and we're not sure when it occurred. We're not sure. I studied Egyptology forever, and there are iconic scripts within the Arabic writing system that appear to be those first scripts, but I think what we're looking at is the last of the iconic age in a particular region. But we're not sure if they were the ones that took it to a phonetical, method of reading. Maybe they were. I think what we are completely drunk on, right, is that we're the smartest we've ever been in the whole history of the world right now. Half because we lie about things that we have organizations that lie about having accomplished things that they don't accomplish. Half because we really can see things that we believe are the very first time these things have ever happened. I mean, as we look back in the history of mankind, there's no evidence that people have been at this level of knowledge before. But scientists who have studied what the Earth would go through if it just sat there and aged say that within 10,000 years, 10,000 very short years, everything modern today would melt back into the ground. An iPhone would simply just dissolve back into dust. Skyscrapers would fall and dissolve back into dust. And so you'd have these pockets of, iron ore where a bunch of iron was, but you wouldn't have any evidence that the building existed. And only things like Stonehenge and only things like the pyramids would ever survive 10,000 year attrition. So, when we come at education for kids through the eyeballs that we have created for ourselves today, I think immediately we have distorted vision. Our objectives for existing aren't clear. But there are basics that we need. And every time the government wants to create a corrupt entity, they typically will call it something that is what it should be, but it is the inverse of what it's being called, right? The Patriot Act is anything but patriotic, right? A patriot would go and get anyone who was responsible for writing the Patriot Act and charge them with treason because it violates the Constitution of the United States. But that's what they call it, right? Common Core is anything but Common Core. There's a principal I used to routinely see at this restaurant down the street. He was sort of a fan of Common Core, and I said, well, now tell me, because all my friends who are teachers are utterly disgusted with Common Core because they had a technique to take the information that they're responsible for teaching a kid and teach them without any problem. And Common Core came in and said, you can't use any of your techniques. You have to use these inferior techniques. And if you're caught doing your personal technique, you'll be in trouble. And he goes, well, Common Core just lets us teach however we want. You can teach them in different ways. And I'm sitting there going, dude, do you teach? Because it sounds like you're buying some brochure piece of hype and you're not a teacher anymore, so you think that that's the way it works. And it was just baffling to me. But the thing is, we're going to have to own this, right? We need to own our kids' educations. And depending on your journey in life, you may not know personally what your kids need to know. And it's no slight to you, really. I mean, we'd all would love to be geniuses or whatever and spend all of our time inside the books, and your kid brings home statistics from high school, and you're like, oh, yeah, I remember statistics, I remember second-level calculus, Most of us parents were like, okay, it's been a long time, because some of us use this stuff, some of us didn't. Or we're using it in ways that the schools don't use it. And so you struggle to keep your kids up to date. But I think I think most parents understand, especially if you watch this show, but if you're just running right into it, we're going to have to take matters into our own hands when it comes to our kids' education. Now, some of you homeschool, and I'll be very honest with you, when it first came out, when homeschooling first came out, I thought it was crazy because the first people I saw that did it, and one of them being one of my relatives, she's got to be one of the most shallow people I have ever met in my life. She happened to be very religious all of a sudden in high school. And she got with the guy who was very religious. Whole family was religious, and she came home and accused everybody going to hell. Of course, the superiority complex got into her because she was utterly fearful that she had messed up her life. And I think she's calmed down a little bit, but she homeschooled her kids, and when you talk to her kids, you get the full impression that that's what she did. And she did it from almost a complete void of knowledge about anything. And so these kids are messed up. But I have seen people do it who are wise and who are clever, and even parents that started out with a homeschooling, and they knew that they weren't qualified to do it, and they got really qualified really, really fast. And that's what I'm seeing more of today. So I'm going to tell you, if you have the gumption to do it, and you're willing to get a curriculum that is very strong, it's not, I don't know, I've never done this, formally done this, right? So I don't know how it works, but hopefully you get a curriculum that is exactly what your child wants to know, regardless if it's easy for you to teach. And you rise to the occasion and you do your own studying. You put yourself through school to make sure that you know what these kids need to know. But I have seen a lot of that now. And now I have seen children who have been homeschooled who are far more prepared for life than kids that go through public systems. So I'm very impressed. Schools in America have gone from this extremely regimented thing, reading, writing, arithmetic, arts, and it has turned into this utterly chaotic mess. When you used to see all the kids going to school, and I was in the tail end of this in the 70s and early 80s, you would see in your mind a machine of kids going through the system and all of us having to get these very basic food groups of life. And it was dying off by the time I came through. But you'll see the videos of schools in the 50s and 60s and the 40s even, and these kids are well-behaved, well-dressed, all in a line. Some of you might get the Prussian heebie-jeebies that is so institutionalized. But I think that institutionalizing intelligence, it puts the entire school on a single frequency where we all work together to hive mind knowledge in this particular area, and it gets you out of the pipe as quickly as possible. And it prepares you, hopefully, for college a lot better than we do today, right? I was just listening to a buddy of mine talk to some other friend of mine about his kid going to college. We have kids that are exactly the same age, and these kids struggled in college. You always struggle in college, but this guy mentioned one thing that I was concerned about with my own kid, which is when I went to school back in the late 80s, if I had gone straight to college, I didn't have to declare a major to get into a 4-year college. I would have been able to, but I didn't have to. And when I was a kid, it was always the same exact thing. You do your 2 years, figure out what the hell you want to declare as your major, because you don't need to declare your major. You absolutely scientifically don't need to know what the hell your major is. If you got the money to pay for the service at the college should get the hell out of your business, right? They're going to take your money and give you a service. It's called education. And then you declare. You declare after you've had your general ed, and you figure out what tickles your fancy. You take a few little elective courses on the side, and you figure out what you want to do. And then you finish it off with your last 2 years of specialized classes. Boom, you're done. Then you get your master's and your PhD if that's where you need to go. But when I was a kid, something majorly different was going on. And the kids had hobbies. And because there was no internet, we had console games. We had console video games that would definitely take up our time. But we lived life. People picked up guitars. They picked up drumsticks. My aunts made almost every blade of clothing they had, and it looked better than everybody else's. They saw something they wanted on television, and they would all huddle together in the kitchen. They'd go downtown and buy a general pattern that matched the clothing that they wanted. Then they would change the pattern and add the bell bottom if they wanted it or whatever. They could make it out of denim, out of polyester, whatever the hell they made. And they just made their own clothes. And they perfected techniques of how to do all the hard stuff together. And they looked amazing. My uncle, the one who was one of my mom's brother, he got into everything that he ever loved. Computers and martial arts and physics and just everything. Illustration, painting. There was nothing this guy didn't do. He was a jack of all trades, right? When we got to college, we knew what the hell we wanted to do. I told my dad at 14 I wanted to be a software engineer, I said computer programmer, but he goes, "You don't know what you want." That's what he said. And I went to California, and I was here in August 19th, and by the end of the year, I was in the credit box of what was then known as Macintax, which is now TurboTax. Boom. Immediately. I was 18 years old. But because I took care of business when I was at home, I was okay. I also painted like crazy on canvas, and took all those skills to California, and I was selling paintings to make money on the side just for fun. Right. And then I took that, I was drawing in computers from probably 84 and up. So by the time I got to California, I already knew how to do it. I had a ton of digital art in my portfolio. printouts and discs and all this other stuff, and I continued drawing. And when I got laid off at 19, 2 days later I got a job at a video game company drawing video games, color video games, in 1989, which was a big deal back in the day. This is what you used to do with your spare time. And hey, man, I dated chicks. I was a lifeguard at the pool. I dragged Maine. I did all the things that kids did back in those days. I was probably inside a little bit more than others, but I also stayed up later and worked harder and got up earlier and just continued that process. But I was other than sports, I didn't get into sports much. Other than that, I was just like every other guy. Right. So you can do it. But we had hobbies that helped us figure out what the hell we were going to do in school. And nowadays, it's how can you buy a toy for your kid to pacify them so they don't have to deal with life. A child isn't allowed to be bored anymore. Or they're not allowed to be bored without some mind-rotting mechanism to satiate that boredom. When I went to my mom as a kid and I didn't have any brothers or sisters, I was pissed they wouldn't make one. I said, hey man, I'm bored. What can I do? And she would tell me 2 or 3 ideas. Why don't you go draw? Why don't you go play with your toys? Why don't you go see your buddy next door? And those are the things I did. Made me more social, increased my imagination, played with my toys, gave me skills when I would draw. It just worked out. Didn't have an iPhone, didn't have the internet. I did have the World Encyclopedia about the age of 9, which blew my mind. The internet and a book collection, right? But education. Steve Jobs was very, very concerned about education. He saw the teachers' union as a gigantic problem. And in his last couple years, he was really trying to make an impact on this thing. He tried to create a device in which kids could carry around. The initial device was always to carry a laptop, a small computer that was affordable and, mobile. And then the iPad technology came around. And that's when he was like, hey, we'll give you a little tiny Star Trek pad, and you'll be able to load up college books. If you remember the last thing that came out that is sort of fizzled out, I think it's called UTunes, I think is one of them. But it's university lectures that you can watch all around the world. They're pretty amazing. And then a bunch of college books, all the college books being transferred to iBooks with all this crazy interactive stuff. You don't hear them talk about it at all anymore. Because as soon as Steve died, the agenda was to make sure everything returns back to the shitty systems that were there before. There's no pride within Apple to keep great ideas going. They'll make a product for a little while and then they just drop it on its hat. But at least they tried. So today, we put our kids in these institutions, and as parents, we barely ask the question. As parents, we're so beat down usually and busy. This is what I see mainly in the world, When it comes to a teacher's conference, the only thing that a parent wants to be told is the automated system is working. Your kid is behaving. Oh, your kid's not behaving. And then the parent's just trying to slap the kid back into shape so that the system can continually raise them. A parent regrets having to help the child with homework because they're so freaking tired. When the mom stayed home and the dad went to work, mom had the patience to take care of the child's homework when they came home. And that was the point of the whole process, right? The curriculums in school are so absolutely chaotic, it's crazy, right? Although we have Common Core hovering over every school in America, we'll take a kid from Massachusetts, a kid from Wichita, Kansas, and a kid from California. And you sit them down and you ask them what their curriculum is like. What classes are you taking, kids? Tell me. Kid A, go. Kid B, go. Kid C, go. And they're not going to have anything remotely similar. Other than they're going to take varying levels of math, varying levels of English, right? But they're not on the same track. But we have this thing called Common Core laying over all 3 states. Now, when I was a kid, I ran into a really interesting issue, and I've talked about it on one of the shows. I was a pretty good student in the Midwest, I think. I was too young to really have a grade that mattered because, from 0 to 6, K through 6, you just... your kid's moving along. If you're just as long as you're showing up to school, they're pretty good with you, right? But I moved to the Massachusetts for 6th grade, and then I did 6th and 7th in Massachusetts. I've had varying levels of thoughts and opinions about this situation. But the more I think about it, the more I look back in time and talk to individuals who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s and talk about their education. My friends who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s have extremely similar experiences in their high schools, but they're 10 years apart. 3 different decades, 3 different generations, 10 years apart. And the way they came to school, the classes that they took, they had the same names for 30 years. And they had, generally at this level of this age, you had this class. And you weren't treated like an idiot. Let's just say that for whatever reason, you never were a mathematical family before you got to school. Well, they didn't care. They forced you right into it. They said, I know you don't know how to do it. That's why you're here. We're going to teach you. And in today's thing, they're like, oh, you have a learning disability. They got you jacked up on a bunch of Ritalin and a bunch of bullshit autistic drugs. Oh, well, then we'll put you in the stay stupid track of class, right? Back in the day, as far as I can tell, they just said, if you are mentally handicapped and you're genetically, carrying an extra chromosome or 2, yeah, you can be in this other room, with special ed. But if you're just a normal human being, you can't complain and whine your way out of getting educated. You just get educated, And so today, let me go back to my story. So I go through 6th grade at Massachusetts, and I killed it. I was living in Randolph, Massachusetts, and it was great. I even was a gifted art student, and so I got all this time off to draw all the time. Like, they take me out of class and say, we need you to paint the windows of the school and come down here to the gymnasium. We'd like to have, I think I did a picture of a guy swinging a bat underneath the basketball, the goal that hung down from the ceiling, because they played a lot of, what do they call it? It's kickball. It's like baseball with a big ball. You kick it, right? And so I did that, and it was good. So here I'm euphorically loving Massachusetts, at least on one level, and then I go off to 7th grade. And the schools are right next to each other. I mean, literally, it's like across the street. There's my other school. I had to walk to school. I took a bus to junior high because it was a little too far away, or a bus to grade school, and I had to walk to junior high. And man, was it cold sometimes. Jesus. But I get into 7th grade, and all of a sudden, I can't pass a class. I mean, I got my ass kicked. I probably had 5 Fs every single year, right? Every single report card. It got to the point, and your parents had to sign your report card. And here I am at home. When I talked to my friends, what was crazy, I talked to my friends, and they were kids. They didn't have any extracurricular conversation, but some of them were able to pass. Actually, one of my friends suffered just like me until the very last semester, I think, and he finally managed to work it out a little bit, but just we're passing by the hair of our pants. But the school had a weird policy in Massachusetts. They pulled everybody together in a cafeteria, and they divided us into 4 groups, A, B, C, D. They did this in front of everybody, right? They split everybody up in A, B, C, D. And they say that the A's, you guys are the smartest in the school. B's, C's, and B's and C's, you're the same. You're the middle class of this thing. And D's, you're the retards, basically, right? You're the kids that are all screwed up, and you're dumb. And I remember it was just horrifying. I'm looking at this going, and I was in the center somehow. I'm either B or C. It didn't matter. It's the same group. And they hadn't seen my report cards yet, so they probably would have thrown me in the D group. But I remember looking at the D group, and one of my good friends was in the D group. And I remember that they were all poor. And most of them were poor. They just didn't have good clothing. They weren't kept very well. And my buddy was one of these guys, right? I don't even remember his name. I thought, wow, that's a way to keep everybody down. That's a way to give a bunch of kids psychoses that they have to carry around the rest of their lives. This whole idea of reverse psychology is complete and utter horseshit. Don't ever try it, because it doesn't work. In any case you've ever heard of it working, the kid is growing up absolutely defensive the rest of their life instead of healthy and happy, right? You can do rhetorical lessons with your kids that feels like reverse psychology, and you can get it to work, but most of the time, direct, blunt force reverse psychology doesn't work. My dad tried it once, and it nearly broke us apart. So I failed 7th grade. Here I can have a conversation about physics. I know more algebra than any kid in my age, and we haven't gotten to that stage yet in 7th grade, because 8th grade was when they did pre-algebra for you. So I can do all this crazy shit. I know all this stuff about cosmology and subatomic physics and all this other shit. I know how to program a computer, for God's sakes. Just getting into it, but I did it at 11 years old with my uncle. I know how to count in binary, all this other shit, but I can't pass 7th grade, for God's sakes. And then I come back to my hometown. And my grandmother was a teacher for 36 years. She had just retired, and my aunt had, my grandmother helped my aunt get in, and she was teaching like 5th or 6th grade. And so they lobby the district to let me go on to 8th grade, and simply said, well, what's required in Kansas for him to pass 7th grade? And they said, yeah, he has to pass English. And so they gave me 2 English classes in 8th grade. And of course the joke is I got in the yearbook twice in 2 different grades, because the hour in which they took the pictures in the yearbook, I was in my 7th grade class when they took the pictures. Then I went to my 8th grade class. So I have these 2 shit eating grin shots in the yearbook. But what it made me, and I absolutely slaughtered 8th grade. And I slaughtered all my other grades until in senior year, and it was just a breakup with the girl that kind of screwed up my grades, but, my fault. But I did great. No problems at all. Passing again. I'm passing with flying colors. I'm getting the hardest teachers, and I'm passing great. So my entire life I'm sitting there going, what the hell? When I dissected a frog in junior high, it was like a 30-day experience. When I dissected a frog in high school, it was a 1-day experience. So how was Massachusetts completely off from Kansas? And how was it within Massachusetts? How was 6th grade absolutely a cakewalk? And then a quarter mile away, the junior high is crazy hard. How are these 2 things in the same district, and how are we so far away from each other within our own country? And I don't know exactly why that is, but I will tell you that what we need to do to fix this is to correct that problem. And what we need to see, and I think what we need to do, and people are going to probably think I'm probably going overboard, let's just put it this way, with a little bit of the regimented, you're at this age, you learn that. Because kids learn things at different ages. I understand that, right? I think that a lot of the rationale of why kids learn things at different ages is because they're brought up with different parents who are also just as discombobulated as the kids are, because they've been through at least, right now in America, we've had at least 30 years of just utterly shit education. You may have been lucky to get a great education in some place, and then you're lucky. But I think a lot of kids don't get anything. But I really would like to see an educational system where the parents and the kids all around the country feel the same level of education, at least in the public sector. Now, if you go to a private school, they can do whatever they want. But hopefully a private school will only make money if they're better than the public schools. But right now, a private school could be horrible, but it's better than the public schools in half the districts around the country, right? So it is my sincere belief, and I don't know exactly what the curriculum should be and the answers to this question, because I've never really talked to a teacher out of the 50s, let's just say, and dissect how they taught kids, for multiple regions, which is what I would imagine would need to take place. But I think that kindergarten curriculums should be identical across the country. And if you're in a poorer district where kids are coming in with a slightly larger learning curve because the parents are repressed through financial problems, racist issues, or whatever, then maybe it's a little bit of preschool before that to get them prepared for kindergarten. Or maybe we just know it's a tougher initiation. But we have to work hard, in my opinion, to get everyone on the same page, because then at that point you won't need necessarily affirmative action. You won't need all this diversity make-believe that people are getting jobs because they're a particular race, right? Because even though they collect diversity information around this country, the United States, they still hire the most qualified person at the end of the day. The other thing that's going on within America, and most of you know this, and you probably already shot it at the video or the audio, is the fact that a tremendous amount of the core classes have been removed or diluted. Like I said, my friends don't believe me, but what's crazy about being told that you're lying is that when you tell someone, that they're a liar, before you utter those words, I think the best thing you can probably do is say, is this the type of person to make that up? And you could misunderstand things, and you think you're telling the truth, but you're telling a lie, or telling an untruth, whatever. I think lie is an intentional thing, right? But I remember when I was a kid, they used to do these, in junior high, they used to do these announcements over the PA a couple times a day. And I remember crossing the hallway, and they were saying on the PA that after 8th grade, a math was going to be an elective. So you had to take it up to 8th grade, because in 8th grade in the farmlands, that's when you usually just quit going to high school, or quit going to school in general, right? High school was for the learning kind of guys, but if you're going to work a farm, 8th grade's good. And of course, 8th grade meant something completely different back in the prehistoric days of education in the 50s and 60s. You got a lot of great education. Remember, like I said, with the Civil War letters that are written home, you're talking with guys with like 6th to 8th grade educations that can they had 12,500 words in their vocabulary at 8th grade in the 1860s. And this is the article I read, okay? Again, why the fuck would I make that up, But today, it's your average high school student has 1,200, and your average college graduate has 2,200 words that they know. If you're above that, then you're above average, right? It's crazy how bad it is, right? But today, the benefit to the banking cartel that runs the world, by you not having to take anything other than basic math up to 8th grade, I think most of you know you don't have to take algebra. Those are for them smart kids. Well, what do? They teach you basic arithmetic, right? So you learn how to add, subtract, divide, multiply. You learn fractions. And that's really where it ends in terms of the mandatory math you have to take in America. What they never teach you, typically, is compound interest. They don't teach you the ecosystem of getting a piece of plastic in the mail that says you've got money on this thing and you can go buy something massive you never imagined, and that there's this thing called interest. And to the degree you can't pay it, the interest keeps accruing on your debt. So you could buy something for 1 penny, and if infinity had anything to do with it, you will owe infinity on the penny. Because that's how it works, but they never ever teach that. The amount of, my kid's going to graduate next year, and I can tell you right now that as of right now, and she's majoring in science, all right? I mean, she's got a hard-ass major. I can guarantee you, so far, she has not learned about how a credit card works. And I've told her 100 times, of course. I think it goes one in her ear and out the other. But she's going to graduate a 4-year degree in a science major and not know. And she's taking massive calculus, massive physics. And, she's not going to know. She'll understand it when I tell her, but the compound interest algorithm of the total that comes out of the algorithm goes back into the algorithm as a variable, this ancestral exponential number that the bankers use to control us. Well, of course, math is going to be an elective. We don't want you to learn how this works. We don't want you to learn the invisible force that destroys your life. We want you to think that credit cards are free money. I've got family members that think like this, right? I've mentioned a long time ago, but since we're on the focus subject of education, I had to teach art in my kids' school, in grade school. And it was so bad that I had to submit a curriculum to the school, which is fine, to the district. I said, this is what I'm going to teach. This is how many classes. I put a 6-class curriculum together, about an hour apiece. And they gave me a schedule, and they gave me a building to show up in. Of course, my kid was in there. Had to go get a TB shot, right? First day went great. First day, these kids sat there, and my God, we're drawing faces, and I was just basically giving the exact lesson my uncle gave me when I was 9 years old. These kids were ranging from 8 to 9. And of course, because it's a great class, because it always works, these kids are drawing faces in 2 seconds, man. But here's what happened. Now, I'm going to get a little colorful in my description of these teachers because I think they deserve the description I'm going to give them. These fat pieces of shit, these fucking lazy teachers, sat in the back of the room and tried to draw. and their atrophied brains couldn't figure out how to draw a goddamn face. These children were able to just follow every line that I put on the board, and I told them exactly the dimensions of what we're doing, but these worthless teachers couldn't figure out how to draw a face, and they were being upstaged by these kids. Next class, I show up. Second class, man. I got 6. I went and got a shot so I could teach these kids, something I'm completely against, right? They put the kids out for recess about 5 minutes before I show up. So I show up and they act like they don't understand how to run a fucking class, right? Oh, we didn't know if you were coming. Oh, I had to register the whole class with the state. You don't think that's a little formalized, right? So here's the funny thing. They see me, and I pipered those kids back in the room. And all the kids that were drawing from the first class managed to make it in. In fact, some of the kids were pissed that they were out playing when I showed up because some of them didn't see me, and they eventually ran in and they got their pieces of paper. And this time, the fat bitches didn't try to draw. They just festered. I call them fat because they were fat and they're lazy pieces of shit who have their personal little egos in front of children, right? If I had anything to do with their jobs, I would kick them out of the educational system for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives. I tie a scarlet letter around their neck to say, this is a piece of shit that spited a child, right? Most reprehensible behavior on planet Earth, right? Third class. I show up, and they had figured out a way to make sure that the class would never occur. They threw a birthday party for 2 kids during the hour that I was going to teach. Can't displace that, right? Because I'm an asshole to be moving out a birthday party. So I left, and I never went back. Now, what I should have done is written a letter to the governor, to the educational system, and just talk about these 2 scumbag teachers that were screwing these kids over. But I know the system protects itself, because this is how the system works in America today. This is what I'm about to say is not going to characterize everyone, but it's going to characterize a ton of people in this system. There's real life, and then there's government life. In real life, you got to get some serious skills and go out and kick ass and take names, and it's a dog-eat-dog world. And it shouldn't be as vicious as it is, most likely, but that's just the way it is, right? And corporations have screwed everyone over that NAFTA's outsourced all of our jobs, and whatever this new trade agreement is going to do the same thing. So I'm not saying it's fantastic in the outside world, but it's where real world exists. It's where you have to behave. It's where you only get a raise if you do really well in your job, right? Or you get fired. It keeps you on your toes. Keeps you as a competitive human being. Keeps you vibrant and alive, right? When you get into a government job, there's no such thing in America, at least, in the educational system of this country, whether it be K through 12 or college, if it's government based, not private industry, not private college based, right? So Stanford is not in this. Stanford is its own college, right? Which is why people want to go there. But none of the professors and none of the staff members of a state institution ever get raises based on their performance. They only get raises because their union says it's time for you to get that percentage every single year. They also get free health care and super duper cheap health care for their family members. They also get a pension. The more years they're in, they mass this gigantic pension. So imagine that. You have a gigantic multi-million person construct in a country that is the entire educational apparatus for children, where the teachers don't have to be good at what they do. As soon as they get tenure, which can happen in 2 years, right? I used to think it took 10 years to get tenure. 2 different words, right? But you can get tenure in 2 years, and then you can barely ever get fired. You know, we're always bitching about the Catholic Church is responsible for more pedophilia on planet Earth than any other institution. Well, the next institution down in the United States of America is the educational system. Drama teachers, gym teachers, art teachers. Whatever they can get a kid off in a weird place in the school, they do it. I had an art teacher in junior high who was accused of feeling up girls in the dark room. I moved to California, and my German exchange student girlfriend took drama, and this dude was he was filming girls changing their clothes Now, obviously, they weren't going down to their bare skin, but he was filming them in their undergarments as they changed by putting a camera tucked away in a corner and saying, hey, I'm just going to close the door here. Why don't you just change into this outfit? Because I think you'd be great for this part. Guy finally got busted. And then we find out that he did 5 to 7 girls in the previous school, and all they did is ship him to Camarillo, California, where he did another 5, and he got sent off to another group. Never gets fired because the teachers union protects him. Steve Jobs was very concerned about the teachers union in this country. It's become an utter mafia, which is organized crime. Now, probably most teachers in the world are good people, at least in this country, but those few bad apples are really bad. And the other thing is that if you don't have performance-based raises, then what the hell's the motivation in life? I see people all the time in these institutions, and they are miserable, absolutely miserable, and all they're doing is pining for a big fat retirement. Okay, so let's play that out for a second, right? You are someone you don't want to be, working at a place you don't want to work at, bullshitting yourself every single day that this is your life that you want for yourself. So what does retirement mean? You've been someone for 40 years in a college institution, and you're going to pop out being the person that you want to be in the end? No, you've completely indoctrinated yourself to be someone that you don't want to be, and who cares how much money you have at retirement? It's like being in Auschwitz for 40 years, and suddenly they say, "Oh, enjoy life. You're 65 years old, and you've got enough money to live to maybe 120. As long as you don't increase your expenses. Enjoy life, Oh, great, now you have aches and pains and illnesses, and in this country you catch cancer so goddamn fast you're going to be dead probably in the next 10 years. Sure glad you saved up all that money. And you have absolutely no wherewithal to increase your performance in life because you've been given raises your entire life and benefits and a retirement package for basically being a mediocre human being. Now, you may choose to make yourself amazing. You may be an amazing person, but I think that what I've seen over the years is there's no motivation to ever be anything that you don't have to be. You get lazy. Right. You don't stay hungry. I just watched a documentary on Jimi Hendrix, and I've seen several in my lifetime. But they asked him, they said, what do you think when people come up to you and compliment you? And he said, I really try not to live off compliments because it makes your head fat and it makes you not not hungry for life. And he goes, I want to stay hungry. Of course, he was really young. He's in his late 20s, right? But I thought that was great. Well, he was probably 25, 26 years old, understanding that basic principle of existence, right? Go to any government institution and try to just count how many people are there at 4:59, and then count how many people are in the room at 5:05. Everyone's gone. Even if there's things to do, you can spend a little 5 minutes and make your morning a little bit better the next day. There's a couple people that'll do it, but usually they're the idealistic young people. The old people are marching out at 4:55. Why? Why work any harder? Why make life better for anyone else than yourself? Why bring a sense of excellence to yourself? But this is the underpinning of the American educational system when it's state-funded. And then you have the opposite. And I know that you guys, if you're teachers, you're yelling at the screen. You're saying, well, there's some of us that do the exact opposite of what you're saying. And I usually find this through the K through 12 group, where really the burden is horrendous to get kids to pass, right? So the system is completely corrupted. It's completely discombobulated. No one sees school as a regimented thing, right? And every time I think about that, I think about Pink Floyd. We don't need no education. There are teachers out there that sacrifice their own money, and they have to work nothing but overtime just to make ends meet within the classroom. And they're usually the teachers that love it, right? I've got plenty of high school friends of mine who are teachers, and they tell me the opposite story. They're like, look, I have to spend my own money to teach kids. But as soon as Common Core showed up, there was a penalty for thinking as a teacher. They're trying to get the teachers down to these Prussian robots. And it's really, really scary. So everyone's always talking about revolution in this world. And, as a person in my position of exhibitioning my thoughts to the world, I can tell you, I've seen this 100 times before I ever started this, which is Alex Jones has had this problem, and everyone's had this problem, which is the following. There's all kinds of brands of revolution, and we have been so beaten down by our government that no longer fears the people, that no one is willing to say in public that they want a violent revolution, right? And in the end, if you're mature enough to study war, you know that you don't want that. And that's why I always say we don't want a violent revolution. It may be necessary at some point, but we don't want it, right? We don't want to make a plan to lose lives. And so obviously, with this show, it's all about sort of hive minding our minds together to figure out what the deception is on one channel, one theme of thought, and the other one is how to get you as empowered as possible to control your life and maybe make kids that have none of the issues that we have, right? Which is what this episode's about, right? But with education for kids, we have an amazing opportunity to have a revolution, a real one. And I think it's going to be regional. And I don't have any idea how Scotland teaches kids, how England teaches kids, how Ireland teaches kids, and all the other countries around the world. I don't know. And maybe your systems are fine. Ours isn't. So in America, if you can hear me, we need an utter and complete revolution about how we teach our children. We have to have common goals for our kids. Minimum standards that have to be met that aren't Common Core. Common Core is all about taking your most unfortunate kid in society and setting the bell curve down at that kid's level. It's not about creating an idealistic goal for children to achieve with minimum standards of how much they have to know before they get to go to the next grade. When I was a kid, guys failed. I never saw a girl fail. We had a couple kids that failed school, and in fact, I was a photographer for my yearbook in senior year, and I had to take a picture of a kid that didn't get his photograph for the yearbook, and I didn't realize it, but it was a kid that was in my class who had failed, and I was a senior, and I'm taking his second junior shot, and he just and the thing was, and I had my yearbook, and I had to take his picture, and I'm a nice guy, if anyone had to take his picture, it was probably best that I took it, right? Because I know my other buddy would have probably given him at least a little line of shit about, oh man, how is the second 11th grade? Is it easier? But I was cool, and I put him up against the wall, and we actually got a pretty damn good shot of him. The look on his face, he was smiling, but he was having the most introspective. If it wouldn't be utterly offensive, I'd put his picture up here, but it would. If I knew him and he was cool with it, I'd put it up there, but I never saw him again, ever. I think I took his picture and I never saw him again, but he had this look on his face that was like, sort of like I fucked up. Like, this sucks that I'm having to get my picture taken, and it's going to go into now it's a matter of public record that I didn't pass, like he could probably sneak into class and no one would know or whatever. Or you just think he's in senior class, until he just ducks into the last second to an 11th grade class, right? And it was a real eye-opening thing to see how the system had failed this kid a little bit. Of course, he probably failed himself too, et cetera, but he was in a lower income area of town and probably had to work just to make ends meet at the family, right? You hear on this show that and everybody does it in their 40s, we all complain about the younger kids not being respectful, being entitled, et cetera, right? And we don't, I don't think parents really care about how kids dress or what music they listen to. We know we're not going to be compatible with our kids on that level. That's fine. That's what we all expect. No Country for Old Men, that's fine. But what we really don't want to see is a kid that's incapable of taking care of the country and capable of understanding, the difference between freedom and liberty, which is liberty is freedom from your government. And freedom is just straight up hardcore freedom. And the way that they're manipulated to give it away wholesale for some perceivable benefit that is based on a threat that's also faked, right? I think kids are growing up a lot more sentient than we give them credit for, but I don't have a lot of exposure with younger kids these days. So let's get to some black and white, what needs to be done in this country thing. Common Core was sold for one thing, and just like the government always does, when the government always spites humanity, in this particular country at least, they sell it with one title and one intention, and then it's almost the complete inverse, right? So Common Core is sold as sort of the solution to the problem I just told you, where I failed in Massachusetts, but I killed it in Kansas the next year. They said, it's going to unify the method of which we teach kids across the country. And boy, did it ever do that. It really did that. But the problem is it ratcheted it down and not up. Now, if you have kids that are in advanced placement classes, my kid was all AP. When she went through, I don't even remember AP existing when I was a kid, but I guess it did. I don't think it existed in my hometown, but you just went to college while you were in high school. That's all you did. Took a few credits at the college. But the quality of the education right now couldn't be any lower in American schools. The Common Core idea is an interesting idea. It's actually a pretty damn good name for something that could be put in its place. But Common Core, as all my teacher friends have told me, it's actually put in place to ensure that a child never fails. Sort of like that bullshit when kids play sports and the kid who loses gets a trophy too. There couldn't be a more ridiculous reinforcement for being a loser than giving a trophy to a kid who lost. What is the mother of invention to ever get any better in life? There's zero. So they're literally, they're sticking in a needle inside the essence of American citizens. And I'm just saying American because I live here. It could be happening in your area as well. I've never heard this happening in Europe, but maybe it's happening over there. I tend to give you guys more credit. But they're sucking the very lifeblood out of this country because they're like the parents of, the kids, people who are 40 and above. We know what the value of guns are. What they're trying to do is get to a point where we have so many, docile kids that they don't want guns. They're terrified of guns, right? Even though it's funny that they're raised to go straight into the army. They're raised with Black Ops video games. I don't know why they wouldn't want guns more and more so now with the children than they do now. But I think that they're trying to make sure that we simply are insecure with our beings, right? As kids go through school and they don't get decent educations, how can you have a confidence level in life? And maybe you become the bully because that's all you got left. But then you have to have those genes to pull that off, right? You have to be a bigger guy, bigger girl, whatever. But we're going to have to set some goals about what you're supposed to know at a particular age. And I should have done it beforehand, but I probably would have been a tremendous amount of research. But it'd be nice to go back and look at how these Civil War soldiers turned out to be so brilliant at such a young age. And just go steal what they were teaching these kids. And knock out every single class that isn't exactly like what those kids were taught when they were younger. And maybe, quite frankly, this bullshit of teaching 7 classes a day to a junior high and high school kid, middle school, high school, maybe that's too much. Maybe that's simply too much for a kid to be taught in a particular day. I tend to believe, from everything that I've ever heard, and when I was a kid in the Midwest, the teachers used to read prairie books to us. And it was the most massively detailed. These are books written in the 1800s about fictional stories, about families. But the thing is, all the writing was based on what was actually going on in the world. And so you read about, an hour where you would learn how to read at your level, an hour of learning how to do math at your level. And then there was hours off where you went and did your homework at school. You didn't come home with necessarily tremendous amounts of homework because it was all built into being in school. Right? You don't go to work in most cases, and at least in a well-balanced non-startup, and do a bunch of work at work, and then you have to bring it all home and do homework at home. If you have that situation, usually it's because you're trying to work extra hard and get caught up for maybe because you're going to take a vacation, or you're at a startup, and it's just, you're going to have to work around the clock because that's what you're doing. But the risk is that the benefit is that the risk you're taking in losing all your personal life is that you're going to maybe make a huge payout. Those are very rare cases, right? But today kids are sent home with this massive homework. Well, they lose all the social interaction with their families as soon as they get home. And if the kid wants to be with their family, wants to be with their friends, well, now they haven't done their homework, and it becomes just like a credit card of homework debt, The more you fail, the more you get behind. There's no way to get caught up, right? So I think that, again, if a child knows how to speak properly, knows how to spell properly, has a decent vocabulary, I think, one, they're going to be able to read books and self-educate a hell of a lot better than they do today. If they can get into math very quickly and have it be a priority and be told, when I went to school, I was never showed the whole ecosystem of math that I was going to learn, right? It was just, oh, what's this class called? Geometry? Oh, I get it. Oh, what's this class called? It's called trigonometry. At no point did someone say, hey, kid, K through 6, you're going to learn this. And then for me, it was 7 through 9 was middle school, and then 10 through 12 was high school. All right. No one ever told me. It wasn't until I was probably a junior in high school that I went ahead and talked to my counselor, and I told the guy, I said, look, I'm tired of being behind all these other kids in math because I went to a couple different schools in different states, and I came here behind the curve. And I said, look, I want to take 2 math classes every single year. And what did the counselor tell me? You can't do that. And I said, why? I remember this vividly. I said, why can't I do that? Well, it's just not allowed. I said, well, if I fail, man. But I never failed. But I still missed 2 classes, statistics and probability, in high school because I couldn't catch up fast enough. But I was taking 2 classes and I did fine. In fact, they were supplementary to each other or they were unrelated to each other. It was absolutely no problem whatsoever, right? Like I said, in the parenting episode, I would encourage you never to say the word because as to a reason why you need something to occur. Always take the time to explain it to your kid, because kids just need purpose to really get behind what you're saying. It takes if you say because, you might have a child that's against you for 2 days and they don't want to do what you say because you said the stupid word because, and we've all done it. I'm not judging. If you explain it, you take 5 minutes out of your life to explain it, or 10 minutes out of your life to explain it as gently as you possibly can, showing the cause and effect, benefits, the benefit analysis for your child, right, to understand why you would hope for them to do something that you want them to do. Then you might have them on your side for 2 days instead of against you, or at least with you. And they think I'm gonna do this, and I'm probably not, but I understand, right? Well, we need to tell kids right from the very beginning what's coming up as soon as they can understand it. Okay, a kindergartner can't fathom physics, right? So we don't need to, maybe they can, but whenever it's possible, we need to teach kids what they're going to learn. Show them the big picture. There's no reason, at least by 6th grade or 7th grade in this school system in America, that we can't show a kid everything that they need to learn, and maybe even give them paths. Say, look, if you want to be a real science major, if that turns you on, then this is probably where we can give you a few extra courses. Well, if you like reading and writing, well, then we're going to give you an English major over here. You still got to take your basics, right? But now let me ask you this, a couple things. So that summation is, let's regiment the schools back to what it was when kids were way smarter than they are today. Okay. Set the expectation with the kid of what they're going to be taking. As soon as they can conceive of the future, we show them the classes that they need to take. But now, think about why we teach a kid math. I'm just going to pick on math for a second. Think about why we teach a kid math. We teach a kid math because you're thinking you're going to always be adding and subtracting money your whole life. You're going to be adding and subtracting resources in your head to strategize your life. And it makes you a better thinker to begin with, right? When I asked my teacher why I needed algebra, and they said, well, because it makes you a better thinker. I didn't get it. They didn't. That's all they said was some canned phrase instead of giving me some examples, right? If you follow the MK Ultra regiment for your finances, one thing that you'll get rid of right away is all your credit cards. You'll just go to debit cards. If you got the money in the bank, that's what you spend. Now, I know that's easier said than done. I have done it now for 12 years. I haven't had any credit cards of any kind. I ran a company that made $6 million, and I traveled all over the world with my debit card. We didn't have a corporate credit card. In fact, one partner got a corporate credit card, and we never let him use it. We never had any debt. I don't have any personal debt of any kind anywhere on planet Earth. But let's just say your child's going to bump into these things. All right. It's a strategic part of life nowadays to have a credit card. If you don't pull your kid out of it. But we don't teach how these things work in school. How is that? How is it that it's an absolute function of life? Your TRW rating, right, is based on how much of a sucker you are to use credit. Now, I want to let you guys know, because a lot of people have this misnomer. One, you can't rent a car without a credit card, which is bullshit. And you can't get a good credit rating without spending credit. I just told you I haven't used a credit card at all for 12 years. I have a credit rating in the 800s, in the low 800s. I had high 800s when I was spending on my credit cards, paying them all off, but now I don't use them anymore. And I've had some financial issues. 12 years ago, I had a really bumpy ride when the dot-com bust killed me, but I managed to straighten everything out, So I was down to 540 at one point with credit cards. It's a very short period of my life, and I repaired it very quickly, but that's how low I got. But I managed to make it from 540 to the 800s without using credit cards. I don't really care what they think about me in the first place, but, this whole thing of, well, you can't get a house unless you have good credit. It's like, okay, well, I have it, and I didn't use credit cards to get it. So think of it what you will. But we don't teach credit cards, so that's a big problem. Now, here's the other thing we talk about on the show constantly about education. There are degrees, and this is becoming more of a common statement from everyone, so I'm not saying anything profound. I just need to put it in this episode, so if you've never heard it before, it's a big deal. And part of the revolution within this particular country is to say that every degree that a college awards a student needs to be attached to a career of some sort. And you cannot say, in my opinion, it's to teach the degree. I don't think you can do that, because you create these ancestral pockets in society that actually have no functional knowledge in life. Having a PhD in certain areas of the world doesn't help anybody in the world necessarily. Now, there are some that can be debated, history degrees and that sort of thing. Perhaps, we all know that knowing history is one of the most important mechanisms to make sure that we don't repeat bad mistakes. But now through the internet, we know that the history of the world has been entirely compromised. It has been completely revised by the winners. But luckily, I think some evidence has made it into the history books, or made it, not been demolished by those trying to rewrite history, because back in the day, out of sight, out of mind was how they ruled. And so whatever was written down in a bound book, or published in a magazine, or published in a newspaper, that's all that my grandparents needed to see, and most of the baby boomers needed to see to galvanize a claim into history, right? Again, how many people think that we went to the moon, and will argue with you that we went to the moon because they saw it on television, and they felt so proud the morning that happened, or the day that it happened, right? They don't want you to take away that specialness from them, and no one's trying to take it away. We're just trying to say, hey, well, honestly, it's like, if you want to believe that, fine, enjoy your life with that information. But most of us now know it didn't happen. Well, I should say a large portion of the people that are waking up. And we don't have any vested interest in the lie. Those who need to believe have a vested interest in the lie. But I personally believe that universities need to be held accountable to prove that the degree that you are about to get, that they are offering you, that they're taking your money for, it relates to an employable job that pays the bills. And if not, it needs to be wiped out. Or perhaps they need to ensure that you have a degree before they give you the second degree, right? Let's just say you got a degree in business administration, which is sort of a maybe it's good, maybe it's not. It's too generic in my opinion, right? They need to give you a degree in a particular division of business, being a producer, being a manager, being a CEO, Otherwise, it's just kind of meandering around a official sounding subject matter, right? But let's say you get a degree that's very employable. You become a chemist. You become, an engineer of some sort. Then you can go back for your communications degree. And perhaps communications, which now is just a worthless degree, right? The amount of unemployed friends of mine that have communications degrees, or they had the communications degree, but they went and got a job where they were at square one when they got the job because communications didn't do anything for them, right? They can go back and get the elective degree that doesn't go anywhere. So you get a good degree, like engineering, and then you can go get your Chicano Studies degree. Or if nothing else, let's just say you think I'm crazy with that idea. Let's just say that we have to track in some international database, or maybe just national database, right? The kids that got the degree and where they ended up in their job. Just use their social security number to track this information, right? You got a degree in psychology. Did you become a psychologist? Did you get a job at all in the remote degree that you got? And so you're free to get whatever degree that you want. But the college, just like the food supply in America, you have to publish what's inside your food. And now when you pick up a can of corn or whatever, if it had trans fats in it, you wouldn't buy it. If it had massive sodium in it, you wouldn't buy it. Most of us are becoming hip to aspartame. We're not drinking anything with aspartame. So you stop the diet sodas because that's where it's blatantly in your face. But you don't realize that all the chewing gum that you have is all full of aspartame. Every breath mint is full of aspartame. Aspartame's everywhere, right? Well, maybe degrees come with a table, right? It's a table at the college that essentially says this degree has this percentage of employment afterwards. And maybe there's some metrics on it. You graduated in 2015 and you didn't get a job until 2017 because the degree sucks so bad you couldn't get a job. So then there's how much time did it take you to get a job at all? And then we could even do it like, what was your average pay? You know, the kid that got the psychology degree goes and gets a job at McDonald's. And so they got a job very quickly, but they're making minimum wage. And then we just have a bit that goes, got the job in the degrees discipline, did not get a degree, and did not get a job in the degrees discipline. So there's a percentage, and it only goes up. It's the percentage of people that got jobs within that degrees discipline. The amount of people I've met in software engineering that have like architectural degrees, journalist degrees. You know, my architectural boss just became disenfranchised with the lack of innovation in architecture, so he jumped out and essentially became a computer scientist, you know. But I think he minored in computer science when he was in school. And maybe that needs to be more formalized as well. Maybe you can only minor in these crappy degrees. You know, I just think that the discussion to formalize education in America is not one that's being had in America. I don't bump into anybody who talks about it. I talk to parents all the time. And the discussion is almost myopically focused on how bad the system is and never, they don't even believe they can make a change unless they go homeschooling, right? Homeschooling, though, is massively expensive because one parent is going to stay home and not earn money. And so if you're going to homeschool, you typically have to leave the metropolitan areas, which cost a lot of money. And whoever is going to work has to have a massive job, or the family has to subsidize it, or you have to go into massive debt to cover all this stuff. And maybe it's all worth it in the end. But usually I know a buddy who I work with in the software music business, and he managed to luck out and get through a startup and make a ton of money, and he immediately moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. He bought a house in a track house community, and he's a Stanford grad. But he said, look, I'm going to raise my kids myself. My wife's going to do the homeschooling thing, and we're taking turns. And I'm going to go earn some money, but I'm going to take my money and make it go a really long distance. And as soon as my kids are educated and we can put them in a nice private school, then we'll take them back to the metropolitan areas, right? I thought it was pretty damn admirable, right? But now, imagine taking several million people inside this educational institution, protected by this teachers union, and they get raises for doing nothing. They get pensions just as long as they endure the system. And we try to combat them. We try to conflict with them. We try to say, look, we want, it's not you aren't the most important thing in planet Earth. What's most important are the kids. I can definitely tell you from my personal friends, there's going to be a ton of people K through 12 who understand that. But there's going to be a lot of people that go, I'm already terrified of life, man. That's why I didn't go out into the real world and get a real job. I stuck in the educational institution because it was what I could do with my degree, which didn't have any real world realization. And, thank God there's teachers, right? My whole family's full of teachers here and there. So I have 100% love for teachers, right? And again, I think that most of the people I run into really love their students dearly, I have college professor family members with PhDs and master's degrees, and I know that they're not going to school trying to bleed the system dry. But how do we convince this apparatus, this government apparatus, to care? Because Common Core was passed with no one's approval. It definitely wasn't a 2/3 majority of this country to absolutely undermine the education of every child in America from K through 12. And again, some of you have great districts, your kids are in AP courses and all that kind of stuff. So if you have gifted children and you haven't been repressed for 400 years in this country and it's just, you don't even know what I'm talking about, well, go to a ghetto. Go to a crappy area of the world where kids barely have any discipline when they go home, where mom and dad definitely didn't get a good education. So there's no help at home. In fact, some parents spite their children because they get more intelligent than their parents. Then that's been going on forever. Again, everything that needs to happen is going to have to be carried out in a mental revolution. I can't stress that enough. I mean, you might hear that concept from me right now and you're like, yeah, whatever. But it honestly has to be it should feel like an alarm is going off in your house at night, and it's the fire alarm. And the same level of urgency you would drag your loved ones out of a burning house is the exact same mental intensity that needs to happen for the educational system, at least in America. I don't know. I think, quite honestly, for those of you, the few of you that listen from Europe, I know that the trouble with my spreading this to Europe is that you have to speak English because I can't fluently speak anything else. You guys probably have a lot of great ideas as well. Maybe you guys have been through this already, and I have no idea. Maybe England did a Common Core in the 70s, and it all failed, and you guys flipped the script, and it all got better. I don't know. If you think you have a really good system, and I'm not trying to get free comments on the videos, but please reply in the comments of this video. One of the greatest links I ever got, I think Jared gave it to me, was a whole video series on the Prussian education system. And until he gave me that series, I didn't understand what Charlotte Iserby was talking about with her gigantic book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And I wanted to add to that because I said it in the parenting episode, but, if you haven't heard of her, she's the daughter of a Skull and Bones guy. And if you don't know about Skull and Bones, it's the organization that brought over the German bankers to take over this country in 1832. And she decided to expose it because she was in the New England area where I went to school and failed in the early 70s, and she was watching this shadow agency come over and infiltrate the educational institution, and they had full 100% influence on the United States government, and they were going to destroy the educational system for this country. And unlike the Prussian education system in Europe, which really did create a bunch of kind of mindless robots with a lesser, as far as I could tell from the charter of it, it was to be more of a nationalistic population, shut off the right brain, make the left brain this obedient soldier. It definitely helped the Nazis build their empire. But what we had was a slightly different version of that, which is to shut all the hemispheres of the brain down. They started pushing in all these ed classes. And I think physical ed is not a bad thing to have in school, but I think sexual ed and all that stuff is ridiculous. Not every kid's the same. And maybe if we did institutionalize the educational process, kids would end up being ready at the same time. But sexual preference and sexual education is something that's very different in every single family. I mean, there's people that have churches they go to which prohibit you from having certain thoughts, and other families that have porns lying around the house, right? So my kid ran into some kids in school that were utterly and completely perverted, little boys that were beyond any adult that I knew. And believe me, I know some skanky adults, right? And these kids were way beyond anyone that I ever knew. These kids said things to her that were just unbelievable. We got the kids in trouble for saying this stuff, right? But the thing that Charlotte Iserby is talking about goes way beyond the educational system, because it wasn't just to corrupt the educational system. And believe me, these guys were patient. These guys were like on a 20-year plan, and man, did they ever win. 30 years later, we got Common Core. But within the plan, just to share a couple things that she has lamented about in videos, right? Which is, you can read her book if you want to. It's massive. I've got a copy of it. But she talked about how they were dismantling the towns that these kids were educated in. And the first target that was very easy for them were small towns like the one I grew up in. And one of the big things, my town has completely fallen for this, right? My town had the high school destroyed, which it was old as hell, but they just retrofitted it, so it was actually fine. Although everyone likes the new school, so they hate when anyone says the old school was fine, of course. But it had character. It was a 3-story, beautiful, brick building. And, I think I've done really well having gone through that school, but whatever. It's really down to the teachers. But they built the school several miles outside of town. And Charlotte Iserby said that was part of their agenda, to move the schools way outside of town. What does that do? Well, now you can't walk to school anymore. Every kid's got to have a car or transportation. For the poor families, I don't know how they do it. I honestly don't know how to do it. And there were areas at the most prosperous age of my hometown that didn't have families that could afford cars for the adults. So how the hell are you going to get your kids to school in the morning? Right? It just represses them even further. And, you would just think that you would look on a map and say, we got to find a place to build a school that's inside town, right? And they had destroyed the local city pool in another cabal to destroy, like, one of the greatest things. It was the 3rd largest swimming pool in the whole state of Kansas. And, of course, they destroy it, citing a bunch of bullshit. When the local cement company, which is one of the biggest cement factories in all of America, was going to sponsor and give away all the free cement to just rebuild the place from scratch. But they could have moved the school. They could have torn down the pool and put the school right on top of where the pool was. And now they put the pool where the old school was, which is kind of funny. But they could have kept it localized within the town so you could actually walk or ride a bike to school if you were poor. Now you can't. There's no way you're going to ride a bike all the way outside of town. It's a long trip, man. It's probably only a couple miles necessarily, but the whole town's 5 miles square. But again, there's something called winter in the Midwest, right? So that was one of their plans that's gone beautifully well, to sabotage access to education. My hometown lost so much of its young population that they did consolidate all of the grade schools into one big giant grade school, which again makes it really tough. You have to be bussed all around the town now because you're 2 to 5 miles away from the school at any one point in time unless you happen to live right in that area. And of course, it was built next to the rich area in town. But the other thing she talked about was phenomenal, which is the gutting of the financial system of the little hometowns. And that was to move in massive corporations into small towns. That was a goal. And I don't remember what episode I'm mentioning this in. There's going to be another episode. I'll probably do this one first. But I've got an episode in the queue that talks about this as well. But I'm going to repeat it here, which is, Walmarts were put into all the little country towns because Sam Walton was actually pro-America, and everything that he put in this store had to be made in America. Sam Walton used to come to our Walmart. He'd fly his plane around a bunch of his stores. He would start in Memphis, I guess, and he'd fly to our, I think that's where he's from. I don't know. Get that confused with FedEx, but he's somewhere in the Midwest, and he'd fly to our hometown, and we had to pick him up in a truck and bring him in. But he was all American. And as soon as he died, what happened? The place gets taken over by the banking systems that have been subsidizing everything. Immediately, that all-American thing got thrown out the door. And if you can find a product made in America in a Walmart, it's like trying to find the Indian on a popsicle wrapper, right? And of course, the hometown that I live in, you have these people that are worshiping Walmart because, one, they get their paycheck from it. And two, they just think it's they're living in the big city now or something. I don't know what the deal is. And everything's so cheap. Yeah. So the ecosystem of a small town is supposed to be built out of small town businesses. That's how little tiny rustic towns in the 1800s and early 1900s were able to exist. Because they had a limited amount of money in the banking system, and it just went in a big circle. Right? So one vendor gives it to another vendor. It just goes in a circle, ends up paying people's rent. There's that old story that I'm going to share with you to kind of illustrate this very quickly. It goes like this. A rich guy comes in from out of town to a small town, and he's looking at a hotel. He needs to stay the night. And I'll tell you right now, he probably only has like one option anyway. But the story goes is that he comes into the hotel room, and the guy says, well, if you'd like, I'll stay down here, and you can go look up at the suite. Here's the key. If I could just have your deposit here, just in case, you run off, and you take something out of the hotel, I'll have this money. And the guy puts down, some denomination of it. Let's just say he puts a $50 bill down for the sake of argument. So the guy leaves and goes upstairs to look at the suite. Very quickly, the hotel owner takes the $50 bill, runs down and pays a debt at the butcher. The butcher takes the $50 bill and takes it down and pays another debt someplace else. And this $50 bill in the story goes all the way around until someone pays rent, and then someone owes the hotel owner $50. And so the money comes back around, and he pays off the hotel debt he had, some guy local in town. Now, the guy comes back down and decides not to stay at this hotel and takes his $50 and leaves town. The $50 paid off a tremendous amount of debts in the town. Everybody is settled now. But it was only with one $50 bill. That's sort of how it can work in a small town. But Walmart is able to buy products in bulk and get prices and build factories and subsidize things so no one can compete with them. So how would you shut them down? Very, very simple. You stop shopping at their place and you shut them down. You stop liking their goddamn store on Facebook. I mean, if you want to take good and evil and make it God and the devil, you're liking Lucifer every time you do that, right? And your average undereducated Charlotte Iserby victim, right? Victim of what she exposed, not victim of her, will think, and argue, well, Walmart's made me a lot of money. And, I know a lot of old women that made a tremendous amount of money under Sam Walton. They entered the 1980 with $50,000 to $100,000 in stock and ready to cash out any point in time. So he made a bunch of people wealthy, but he did it with American know-how and American GDP. I don't think that the educational system in America is accountable to anyone. The teachers are accountable to the horrible system and not the other way around. Students that are passed using Common Core, you're not allowed to fail with Common Core, right? It's the teacher's fault if the kids ever fail. Well, back in the day, you might be able to say, in that little country school building, that it was the teacher's fault because they got every piece of education that they needed. And the kids weren't repressed in some weird way. And so somehow they got ignored and they didn't make it work. They engaged the student or whatever. But that's not the way it is today. Kids are full of all kinds of weird entitlement and weird things and repression of invisible nature. And so they don't graduate properly. They graduate with a piece of paper without any knowledge. What's that do? That creates a serf. Someone who has to rely on the Barry Sanders or Bernie Sanders, whatever the hell his name is, the socialist candidate here in America. They have to rely on the system for the rest of their lives, making them a slave. Now, we're all slaves to something, but at least most of us feel like we have a destiny, or some of us feel like we have a destiny in the midst of that we understand there's a need to have a purpose in life, and there's a need to have pressure in life to engage your purpose, Most of us just call it bills, So I hope this was sort of an eye-opener, at least on some level, that we need a revolution in the United States of America. We need it, and it's going to be a tough situation to get past. And I think that, quite frankly, idealistically, we need to just flush Common Core, I think we do need something that would be a Common Core, but it's more of the 1800s Common Core with modern technology overlaid on top of it. I think the kids need less classes during the day so they can do their homework with the teacher there to help them get through their homework. I think that the colleges need to be held responsible for the value of what they're charging you for. There's malpractice lawsuits all the time when you go to hospitals and you get sewed up incorrectly with a pair of scissors in your gut, or you get a staph infection, or your relative gets over-medicated and essentially murdered by the hospital. There's financial repercussions when that happens, right? But there's no repercussion if you get drained $125,000 in some educational institution that basically ensures your child never succeeds in life because they have too much debt and no education that's worth anything, right? No education. It sounded horrible. Again, I would love just to have an independent company, do the chart I talked about where you can go on a website and it just simply tells you what the employable odds are with the degrees that you have. Maybe we can just create a website that's like Craigslist, and you just show up and pick the category of degree you got, and you just simply volunteer your information. Just say, hey, I got this degree and I've been unemployed for 5 years and there's no hope in sight. I send my resume everywhere and nobody cares. Maybe just get somebody to make a little website like that. And then we'll just know. And I guarantee you, a tiny little sampling of people, you can get 1,000 to 10,000 people in America to cough up that information. And it's going to be accurate. Up to 10 million people, probably. It's just the way surveys work, if they're honest. And of course, the schools will be automatically filling it with a bunch of bullshit data, but maybe there's a way to identify people such that they can't forge their information. Social security numbers that are kept secret, but we can validate them with state records. Just to say, look, that social security number's already been used. You can't submit just randomly. Or that social security number's like Barack Obama's and it's not his. It's a guy who died in 1968, right? I think you feel me. I'm looking forward to your comments. Hopefully this wasn't boring. Hopefully it's resonated with you. Of course, the beautiful thing about making these really long videos, and I think my average view time on a video is 27 minutes right now. None of them are under an hour, and most of them go at least an hour and a half nowadays. But the nice thing about making a nice long video is that if you make it to the end, then this engaged you, hopefully, right? I know some people just put it on and do something else with life, probably fall asleep. But, if you make it to the end, then you're ready to comment. You're ready to add something to this equation. If you make it to the end, hopefully you're subscribing is something that's interesting to you, because we're going to get into all other sorts of topics. And if nothing else, subscribing will get you access to everyone else's comments. If you like, that's cool. That shows me that, what I suspect is the number of likes I have and the number of people that made it to the end of the video. Because, if you're into that kind of punishment, then obviously you liked it, I think. But anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. MK Ultra Radio for all the arteries. That's all I'm going to say. Let's change this world one concept at a time, and this one's about education. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and I'll see you in the next video. Over and out.